Hi everyone, it's just after 12 now, so I'm going to get us started. My name is Amy Chambers and I am the Campus Cycling Officer at South Lanarkshire College. I'll be hosting today's session and we have some of my colleagues, Tamsin, Emily and Nico working behind the scenes to make sure that the session runs smoothly. Welcome back to those of you who have joined us for one of our previous sessions, and welcome to those of you who are joining for the first session of the Switching Gears Festival. For those of you who are new, the Switching Gears Festival is a collaborative project between campus cycling officers at 9 universities and colleges across Scotland, who all want to learn about how we can be more inclusive and accessible in the way that we approach cycling. With the help of some amazing individuals and organisations, we've created 6 sessions designed to introduce projects and campaigns which support currently underrepresented groups in their cycling journeys. This is our 4th session in the Switching Gears Festival, and we'll have 2 more sessions after this one. You can check out our Eventbrite for more details on that and to book your tickets as well. Don't worry if you missed any of our previous sessions. All of the sessions are recorded and you can view them in your own time. So I'm just going to quickly take you through some of the housekeeping rules for today and the schedule as well for today's session. So first, we're going to have a presentation on inclusive infrastructure from today's guest speaker, Hickey. After the presentation, we will have a live Q&A session with both of our guest panelists. And if you'd like to ask a question, then please use the Q&A box that's at the bottom of your screen, just at any point throughout the session. We will work through the submitted questions after the presentation. You can submit your questions anonymously if you'd like. And if you need any assistance with that or anything else to do with accessibility, then please just message us directly via the chat. I will say just please don't submit your questions to the speakers into the chat on Zoom. It just really helps if all the questions are in the same place, so please do use the Q&A box. We're also live streaming to Facebook, so if you're joining us on Facebook, then you can submit your questions in the live chat. We'll be keeping an eye on both platforms, so your questions can still be included in this session. The entire webinar will be recorded, so if you miss something or if you can't stay for the entire session, you'll be able to find the webinar later on the Switching Gears Festival YouTube channel. If we run out of time and cannot answer your question in this session, we'll make sure to upload an answer for you in that recording. This session is scheduled to end at around 1 PM today, UK time, but we may go over or under slightly just due to the number of questions that we get. Auto transcription is on, but you can turn this off if you wish. I will note here that the auto transcription isn't particularly great at understanding my accent, so I will apologise for that now. Okay, so our session today is on inclusive infrastructure. And our guest speakers are Bo Hickey and Diogo Martins. Bo is an infrastructure officer and Diogo is an inclusive design manager. They both work at Sustrans, which is a charity that is making it easier for people to walk and cycle. Sustrans connect people and places, create livable neighbourhoods, transform the school run and deliver a happier, healthier commute. Right, without any further ado, I would like to hand over to you, Bo. Would you like to turn your camera and mic on, please? Thank you.
Okay, so I will share my screen and shortly I will discontinue looking down and we'll be able to look up. Okay. Okay, Amy, can you just confirm that's without the notes visible, just the slides?
Yeah, that's it. You're good to go.
Cool, that was my main worry about the whole session was my notes being visible. And you just introduced me probably better than I could introduce myself. But I will go to an introduction nonetheless. Yes, my name is Bo. I'm an infrastructure officer within the sizable Places for Everyone team at Sustrans. Previously to this, I've worked at West of Scotland Regional Equality Council on behaviour change projects, and I also sit on the Cairngorms National Park Equality and Inclusion Forum, which is relatively new, so that's quite exciting. I can't present Sustrans better than you've just presented us, Amy, but essentially we are the charity that promotes walking, wheeling and cycling as a means of transport. As in my kind of officer role and in this presentation, I'm kind of going to be looking at inclusive infrastructure, almost like a kind of baseline perspective, like what everybody should know, what any cycle activist, I guess, would need to know. And Diogo is here to answer some questions because we have folks in Sustrans working on this topic in a lot greater kind of specificity than I would. So thank you, Diogo, for being here. Yeah, I wasn't really sure exactly how to balance the session in terms of what knowledge I'm sharing. So I thought we'd begin with like from the most simple perspective possible and just start with some basic path philosophy and look at some of our mammalian instincts in terms of actually building infrastructure. And then we'll go into the topic, which is inclusive infrastructure, and then we'll go to the importance of community design, community co-design, I should say. And I would find it disingenuous in the era of Zoom to assume that everybody is paying rapt attention. So if you are multitasking or doing your knitting or your juggling or whatever it might be, and you maybe missed something, don't be too embarrassed to ask it in case you missed it. That's absolutely fine. Okay, so what I'm going to do first is just have a bit of coffee. Great, and then we'll go into our path philosophy. Which button shall I press? There we go. Okay. So yeah, so different places meet different needs. Essentially, unless you are living blissfully in a state of homeostatic equilibrium, you are going to need to move around to get your various needs met. It's your entitlement to do so. You know, sometimes you need to go to the co-op to get bananas for your pancakes, you know, so we need to get around. We're all entitled to do that. And I've included this picture of a sheep trail. And I just want to draw your attention to it because there are no human footprints on this. This is entirely made by sheep. And so it kind of speaks to what our mammalian instincts are. You'll notice that it is very well defined. It is very visible. It is quite uniform. It is quite linear. It is unambiguous. And crucially, it also avoids anything that would require a sheep to expend extra energy to get across. So boggy bits, rocky bits, things like that. These sheep have defined for themselves the easiest way to get from A to B. We intuitively pick out the most efficient routes. If you have a blank landscape and you need to put a route through it, you're going to pick out the most efficient route, basically. And we do this even when we're challenging ourselves with difficult landscapes, we do this. So even if you're a rock climber or a mountain biker, you're going to pick the most efficient route for where you're at. So that's something to note. The other thing is that others will follow on the routes that we build because you're more likely to trust the prior human judgment than to head off into the unknown, basically. And that's a key point I would like us to remember. After we've built the infrastructure, we tend to adapt and redesign it to accommodate more people. A lot of the projects that Sustrans has just now are basically retrofitting old routes and bringing them up to a much better standard. And then this is the point I'm kind of trying to arrive at. Design reveals who we consider to be part of the community for whom we are designing. And it comes back to others following on the routes that we build. So essentially any human in any set of wheels should be able to rely that if they see dedicated infrastructure, that it's going to be usable by their specific set of wheels. They are trusting the path designer's judgment. And that's kind of what makes the difference between a path being usable or essentially heading off into the unknown of what lies ahead. And I've included this picture of a deer trail because I was following it for about half a kilometre or so, and I'm just looking at it and wondering, why does it go by this fence? Like, deer are jumpy, why don't they just jump over the fence? So I followed it all the way down, and I realised that this gate in the middle of nowhere has probably been open for years, and they've picked this out as the most efficient route. And it also occurred to me that younger deer may not be able to jump over the fence, and so essentially what this herd has done is created a route that they reuse that is accessible for everyone in that herd. So I thought that was quite a nice analogy for us as well. And that's the key point as well. The best routes that we build are going to be used over and over. We all do this. We all tread the same paths within our local communities every day. And I'm going to come to a quote now, which I won't really talk about actually, because it kind of speaks for itself. This is from our Cycling for Everyone. The phrase "for everyone" is a theme that runs through a lot of what Sustrans does. So it comes up again and again, just reinforces that message. But the quote is, "All urban design, including cycling, is not neutral. It either perpetuates or reduces social inequity." And I just think that's a winning quote, and it is in the Cycling for Everyone guidance by Sustrans. Okay, so this is possibly my most complex spiderwebby diagram that I've got. The two angles that I'll approach this discussion from, and the irony is in a presentation about inclusion is that it's practically impossible to include everything that you want to include, so bear with me. But the two angles that we'll be exploring will be physical environment and personal safety. In terms of the physical environment, when you're thinking about your design, there's a higher potential impact on the top of the protected characteristics, and then with personal safety, it's more of a higher risk of exclusion, harassment, or victimization in a public space. And those can overlap depending on your kind of identity, which of those affect you more. The protected characteristics here are those that are defined in the Equality Act. I've split age into kind of young people and children, and then senior citizens, because there's slight differences in how folks will be impacted. But it is worth noting, and I know I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but the phrase protected characteristics is not synonymous with minority groups. We all have protected characteristics, and the Equality Act protects us from being discriminated against based on those characteristics. Everyone, regardless of who we are. Okay, so we'll start with the physical environment. So the Scottish government a few years ago put out the Designing Streets Toolkit, and this is now being used by street designers, would you believe? And within that, it defines the street user hierarchy, which has thusly, people on wheelchair or on foot are at the top of the hierarchy in terms of priority, and then people on bicycles, then public transport, and then after that you've kind of got your commercial vehicles, private motors, and so on and so forth, which I've apparently not even put on this slide. In terms of the people on bicycles, and this is also the wheeling part of wheeling and cycling, we have to consider diverse sets of wheels. So although many people now use electric wheelchairs, there are plenty of people still using manual wheelchairs, mobility scooters, cargo bikes, tandems, side-by-side tandems, tricycles, recumbent bikes, trishaws, hand cycles, and I'm sure I've missed a few other innovations in bike design there. Now, what I'm going to argue, based on the street user hierarchy, is that really designing infrastructure for active travel, designing infrastructure for cycling is inseparable from designing infrastructure for walking and wheeling. So I was trying to think of a phrase for this, and I think I was thinking of it as like including out as well as including in. So instead of having a very driven focus towards designing gold standard inclusive cycle infrastructure as a standalone, we need to be considering walking and wheeling equally, in equal measure, alongside whatever cycling infrastructure we do. So inclusion kind of goes out the way as well towards people who are not using bicycles. And in that sense, what we'll be thinking about is the language of our pavements. This is I took this from a blog by RNIB, which talks about kind of how urban design has a secret language for folks who can make use of it due to visual impairments, and different tactile strips and different heights of curbs and things like that all have their own specific meaning. And once you start learning it, it's pretty cool. Also, sensory processing and interpretation. In terms of interpretation, I'm thinking in terms of signage. You know, can it be read by everybody? Can it be read by somebody with color blindness, for example? Is it easy to understand by somebody who English is perhaps their second language? You know, is it dementia friendly? And then we've also got sensory processing. So often we want to make a place pleasant by including a lot of kind of artwork and sculpture and things like that. But I've also heard feedback from people that they found places too overwhelming, too cluttered. So even though it wasn't technically stopping them from going there, they wouldn't go there because it was too overwhelming for them. So that's something that we need to include as well. And then the topic, segregation, which is essentially separating people on bicycles from people who are going by foot or another form of wheels, which is extremely important, particularly in urban areas. So we're going to get into some techie stuff now. Okay, let's look. Okay, yes. So if you were to approach a project from design angle, this is what you would be considering. You would be considering your corridor and your dynamic envelope, which is the space around you. You need to have enough elbow room. You need to have enough headroom. You need to have enough space to not be very good at cycling. You need to be able to wobble safely, and you need to be able to pass others safely, even if you are wobbling. So there's that. They've got surface materials. Often you get kind of recreational paths that have a kind of wind dust surface, which is an unsealed surface, and actually the friction can prevent it from being used by some folks where it just takes more energy. You also have to consider when you have a sealed surface how slippery it's going to be, particularly in winter in the Cairngorms. Gradients and ramps, there's geometric requirements here. If a gradient is over 5% for more than 10 meters, that's going to be a barrier for a lot of people. And it's interesting because it's kind of imperceptible, because very few people can look at a gradient and just determine it by their eyes. So you literally have to measure it into the design. Turning radii, I'll actually go to the next slide for this because it's the same slide with a different picture. So the turning radii is going to be affected by how long your vehicle is, how long your wheels are. And then of course we have barriers and obstacles. So a pinch point is basically anywhere where the path just comes in like that. Access controls, which are often put in with good intentions, but just don't work very well. And then we've got chicanes, the classic, you think of the two guardrail setup where the idea is to slow people down from rushing around with great abandon on their bicycles, but actually they're just really hard to get around depending on what kind of bicycle you're using. And just to exemplify all of the above and to talk a little bit about the importance of width when it comes to cycle routes. Just a few examples of the kind of typical widths that people typically need and what you can get in to that width of path, who can use it comfortably. So we often talk about this 3 meters wide being kind of baseline, and this is the reason. So I've got quite a few slides now just to talk more visually about some of these things. I have to lubricate the old vocal cords so I can keep up the momentum. So here we have, this is actually defined as a shared use pavement. So at both ends of this street, it's got signage for shared use. There were also objections, though, from the public that car parking was being taken away. So the car parking was reinstated. And as you can see, it becomes, I mean, is it shared use? You could hardly get a standard bicycle comfortably along this route. So there's a clear problem there. And then we've got kind of the other end of the spectrum in terms of urban, by not at all urban. So basically, this is what I'm talking about. We have a very, very good intention. This is a narrow path with a central bollard. The bollard is, of course, designed to slow people down as they're coming up to the junction. So whoever's made this design decision has done so with good intentions, and it just doesn't work because anybody with a bicycle wider than standard is really forced out. And it's kind of a tipping hazard as well by being forced out around the bollard. I should note as well that I took this picture during lockdown, so there's really no cars, but that is the A9 and it is absolutely heaving all year round under ordinary circumstances. So yeah, really, really dangerous. Oh, the bollards have been removed since though. So that's good. And then we've got an access controls, some examples. So the A-frame access control on the left is designed to restrict motorbikes, but it restricts practically everybody. You know, no need to even talk about that. And then on the, which is my left and my right, on the other side is basically what we've got is a farm gate. So farmers basically, they need to restrict the movement. But in terms of securing access, what we've got is a convoluted setup, which is actually a very good setup with cattle grids, so folks on bikes can get through. But the gates there will be self-closing. They'll be opening in both directions, and then they've got a handle that kind of extends the width of the gate, the height of the gate, I should say, and so it's usable by folks who are sitting at any height, basically. So that's a kind of good and bad access controls examples. We've got an example of segregation in Glasgow, the South City Way. So this is a unidirectional cycle path, and it's of course one going in the other direction on the other side. But you can really see here that street user hierarchy. So here, folks walking and wheeling have priority over folks who are cycling, and that's exemplified by the zebra crossing and the tactiles, which indicate that there is an informal crossing. Actually, I'm not really sure if that is, the picture needs to be bigger. I think it might be a signalized crossing on both sides of the cycle path. I'll need to check out that detail. Another example. This is an example of kind of gradients and turning radii designed in. So it's designed by Sustrans engineer. So the way that it's been designed and the way that you get around the problem of gradients is by not going straight up. Basically, you can do a winding path, and it's also wide enough for users to be able to pass each other, and the handrails also allow folks who maybe are on foot and need that bit of extra stability. And then just to prove, as if you needed specific evidence, just to prove that the width of a path is important, these folks could easily pass each other if they had what we've got here is somebody using a mobility scooter and they're traveling alongside somebody on a bicycle. They could easily pass each other if, for example, they had recently had an argument and wanted to ignore each other entirely. That would not be an issue on this path. I'm going to have another sip of water. Right, next section is personal safety. Now, I wasn't really sure. This is going to be a very mild discussion of harassment and safety in public space. So there's a content warning there, be about 5 minutes. And if you're just not in the mind frame for it, you know, step out and step back in 5 minutes. The fact of the society that we live in is that some groups are subject to greater risk of harassment in public spaces than others. We're all impacted by that because it can be based on perceived identity and characteristics, as well as actual identity or characteristics. So you don't have to be identifying with a particular group. You could be at risk if somebody else has identified you as part of a particular group. So it really affects all of us. Most people will avoid places or routes that seem unsafe. So that's, I suppose that's interesting, because you may be able to kind of prove statistically that place isn't unsafe because no crimes have been recorded there, type thing. But if it seems unsafe, people are not going to include that in their daily route. And as with the quote that I had previously, infrastructure design can improve or it can actually worsen personal safety. So an important thing to note is that, you know, some of us have experienced harassment and some of us haven't. If you haven't, that's not something that you've experienced. It can be quite hard to perceive those risks in the environment. So it kind of becomes your responsibility to bring consideration of that into your awareness cognitively. I think what can happen is you go to a site visit and you perhaps want to design around this location and you don't perceive the risks straight away. So you have to bring it into your awareness cognitively if you haven't already experienced it. Okay, here are the things that we would like to consider when considering personal safety. So your means of egress is your escape routes. Basically, are people going to be, in times of emergency, are people going to be trapped, or are they going to be able to get out? The means of egress is in all architecture. Enclosed spaces as well, people are going to avoid this, especially things like routes that go between tall buildings. Most of us would avoid things like that. It's good to consider passive surveillance. So this is the eyes of people who are passing by or perhaps live close and are able to see onto that particular route. So that's passive surveillance. Lighting, of course, I don't need to go into too much detail about that. And then wayfinding. If in a pinch or an emergency, you need to get out fast, you need to know where you're going, basically. So some examples. Underpasses are one of the big ones that we talk about all the time. So on the left-hand side, we've got a poorly lit underpass. You can't see from one side to the other. And even outside of the underpass, you've got very restricted lines of sight. There's a guardrail all along. So that's a barrier to actually being able to, you know, duck across the road if you have to. And there's pinch points. So for example, two people who needed to pass each other in mobility scooters would find that very difficult to do that at that location. And then the other example is a very well-lit short underpass. You can see from end to end the space to pass other people, and even like the bright color of the painting is helpful for visibility and things like that. What we've got in this one is an active travel path, a bridge, and it's a bridge there. Now it's got quite high parapets designed to, of course, stop people climbing up and going over the side. But what that means is that you don't have very much egress, right? So it's an A to B with very few means of egress. However, the design of the parapets is quite transparent, and there's a lot of passive surveillance in the houses and streets around it. So there's kind of been a balancing act that's been done there. And then something that is just a neat trick in terms of wayfinding is to include solar stud lighting set into the pavement. The lampposts in the back actually have nice wide beam angles as well. So this allows visibility, but wayfinding is supported by the actual solar studs as well. So now we move on to the community engagement and co-design section. Okay. How shall I start this? All of the above everything that we have just discussed is best implemented by designing with the people who are going to be using these specific groups. Now, there's different ways of actually consulting with people. The statutory minimum consultation is quite a passive thing. So if projects are coming forward, it's quite often designs will be concocted before they've actually engaged with folks about it. And it's really passive. So you can put an advert in the local paper, publicize it online, and these are the kind of minimum requirements, as well as going to statutory consultees like community councils. But the key thing here is the designs sometimes come before engagement, and once that's happened, it's actually much harder to go back and redesign based on feedback received, because you're going to have a resistance to kind of designing from scratch once you put a lot of hard work into it. So it's make things easier for yourself by engaging before you start designing. So the best practice that we would kind of advocate for is community engagement in advance of the design. So do a world of research by engaging with many stakeholders and gathering all their feedback, and do it proactively. Create a stakeholder map, a list of stakeholders, and include everybody. And you can also experiment with different types of engagement. One of the things that we often do is put in temporary infrastructure so that we can see how the community responds to it. And that's one of the best ways of engagement as well. I won't go into too much detail about equality impact assessment specifically, because it's a whole topic in itself, but I'll put the terminology in there so you can follow it up in your own time. It is a statutory duty under the Equality Act 2010 for projects to undergo an equality impact assessment. Now, what happens with some groups is they find that perhaps due to equality impact assessment being a legal obligation, some groups find that they're approached over and over and over again by consultants and local authorities for feedback on the design. And I think you just need to be careful with people's time. There is a lot of guidance already out there, and it's on you to do the research as much as possible, so you have as many answers as possible before you start approaching groups. You don't want to be absorbing people's energy if you don't have to, basically. And then I've got an example. So in Sustrans, we have actually several different teams working on infrastructure. So as well as places for everyone, we've got the street design team. This is an example from Lenzie, and it kind of covers the indoor and outdoor forms of engagement. So we've got the indoor community engagement, where you literally use mapping tools. It was very important for me to get in a picture that has a little tree in it, where folks can actually mark out on the maps what their feedback is. And then the outdoor site visits with stakeholders is really important as well. If you haven't done a site visit, you literally don't know what the site's like. And sorry, somebody is raising their hand, and I don't know if it's directed at me or not. I'm going to let you guys deal with that if that's okay. One of the things we did for Port of Inverness is we took out a group on site, and it was kind of like a fun kind of community walk around, doubled as a fun event, as well as getting feedback. And because we were talking to people who were actually impacted, it was a lot easier for us to kind of see things from their point of view. And then I've got a project I was going to go through in terms of how we layer the design. So once we've done our community engagement, we need to be designing and redesigning and redesigning, basically. So I'll just take you through it. This is key UC before the project. So what we have is quite a quite an unused town centre garden. The railing really prevents people from going in there, and there was quite a steep gradient on the path that was preventing people from going in there as well. And it was only a very short section of path, but the gradient was preventing people going in. So first we did the feasibility study, which was lots and lots of community engagement, lots of public meetings and things like that to discuss it. And this section was identified as the priority area for improving cycle safety. We went to the concept design, and feedback from the concept design from the public was that they wanted to maintain it as a memorial space because it was a memorial garden. They also wanted to see some seating provided. We went to develop design, and the question was, can we create a loop so that children can practice on their bikes safely? And then another one was, we need more cycle parking. So that was included in the design as well. As we got to technical design, this is when you start getting like showered with designs of like every little nut, all the little nuts and bolts are designed out. So at this point, it was indicated that the seating, which is parallel with the ground, could be mistaken as a pavement by somebody with a visual impairment. So we started to include the tactile strips to indicate that there's a drop after the seating. Then we were actually constructing it, actually building the thing. And the folks who were visiting the site during the construction were saying, well, we're actually quite worried about the gradient on either side of the path. It's not really allowing for wobble room. And so in response to that, it was all backfilled to level everything out. And eventually the output was this plaza type area, complete with cycle parking, friendly to multimodal travel because it's right next to a bus stop. You've got seating. No question of there being enough space for everybody. A new loop path, a new access into the primary school, which you can only just catch a glimpse of in the back there. We broke through the existing wall so that the kids could go straight into the primary school. And the seating is there as well. And that really brings me to, only half an hour. Well done to me. I just wanted to give credit to the sheep because they helped me to contribute to my planning of this presentation. So I didn't want to just have the trail. Here is an actual sheep. And then once we go to the chat, I'll copy and paste some of these resources into the chat. Okay, I'll hand back over to you guys to facilitate the conversation. That went a lot quicker than I expected it to.
That was great, thank you, Bo. That was a really good presentation. If you'd like, you can stop sharing your screen now, and we'll just go back to the cameras. Excellent, thank you. Yeah, and thanks for including those resources as well. Oh, camera's not on, I'm here. Yeah, if you wouldn't mind sharing them in the chat for everyone to see, that would be great. I would definitely recommend that if anyone in the audience is interested in learning a wee bit more about that stuff, you'd look into the resources that Bo's provided. I've already checked out the resource on like the secret language of pavements, and I was honestly like quite surprised that I've not noticed all this before, because it's literally just built in everywhere. But yeah, okay, so we've had a great turnout for today's session, and we've got some questions, some pre-submitted questions, some questions coming in, as well as questions from the Switching Gears Festival team. So we'll start going through them. If you'd like to submit a question for Bo and Diogo as well, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try and answer as many as we can. And for Facebook, remember, just pop your question in the live chat and we'll see it there. Okay, so are you ready? Okay, so this festival has been put on by campus cycling officers at colleges and universities across Scotland. And many of us are developing cycling strategies for our campuses. Would you say that there's a need to embed these considerations for safety and inclusivity into the cycling strategies? And how might you suggest that people do this appropriately?
Diogo, do you want to answer?
Yeah, but it's not the simple question. It's more about I think the first step, and it's something that we are currently working on at Sustrans, is getting us basically giving a step back and analyze all the full process, the way we engage with people, the way we turn that engagement into design, everything else. So we have to really approach this in a very wide way, so we can just understand where we are missing the point. And of course, we have to do things that Paul was saying before, like trying to reach those people which are usually not in the conversation. So we are aware that besides our great work on this, we have a lot of things to do, and we have a lot of things to improve. And I think, for example, when you talk about universities and people who do research and things like that, so I think it's basically the same process. Is understanding exactly what are the persons that we are not talking about, and what are the ways we should be considering to get these voices into the conversation and things like that. So I think this is very philosophical and things like that. But I think in terms, I think you can just you can try to make this more practical if you start by thinking about the process, and that's something that we are trying to work right now and understand how the process from end to end works, and how this makes things useful for everyone. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
I hope I did. I replied quite well. Let me know.
No, that was good, thanks. I think that's a really important point, that we definitely need to be including as many voices as possible as early as possible. So kind of what you were saying, Bo, about community engagement and getting that, getting the community and all kind of stakeholders involved as early as possible to ensure that everything is as inclusive as possible is really, really important. Okay, I'll move on to the next question. Are there any good examples of places, for example, countries, cities, or campuses, which have been successful in considering different needs and abilities when designing walking and cycling infrastructure? So you can be as wide as you want. You can give me a country.
Scotland. Obvious answer. Yeah, I mean, that just causes like a wave of thought. I suppose the thing that springs to mind at the moment is the network development team in Sustrans has been reviewing the whole of the national cycle network, and the ambition now is to bring the entire national cycle network up to the same standard, which would be suitable for an unaccompanied 12-year-old. So I think that if that can be achieved, that would be our best example. But then on a smaller scale, I'm also thinking of the Inverness campus that is quite a recent structure, and the whole campus was designed around people's kind of active travel needs. I probably can't do justice with a description of it, but the entire campus has been designed almost like a small village with wide pavements, shared use where appropriate, direct active travel links over the A9 into the town centre. And it's all designed as a kind of a low traffic zone, and that's reinforced by the actual aesthetic of the design as well. So yeah, maybe I'll try and find a photo and share it.
Yeah, that would be good. One of our campus cycling officers who's involved in this project is based up at the University of the Highlands and Islands. She works for the Student Association there. So yeah, she's probably got a great campus for cycling. It's all set up already.
We just recently finished funding the. So previously we had funded the Golden Bridge, which goes over the A9, and then on the other side now we've got the North Bridge, which is for buses. Buses the only traffic that are allowed on it other than active travel. So it's a nice line of connectivity going from residences right into the town centre. And the folks at HIE who really designed the campus were very insistent that it should be a campus for everybody, like much wider than just the student body, if you will. So, yeah.
Excellent, that's great to hear. And hopefully we'll see more of that coming in everywhere in years to come. Okay, I'll move on to some of our pre-submitted questions now. Okay, so when designing inclusive infrastructure, you need to consider several factors such as low environmental impact and designing it to fit the landscape. Do you have any good examples of balancing different and sometimes competing factors to get a good end result?
I'll take that one first of all, and then Diogo, I think you'll probably have some stuff to add as well. That question is really something that we have to consider quite a lot for our kind of more rural projects. Rural is a subjective term, first of all, let me just put that out there. Most of my projects are based rurally, so we often have to consider a kind of ecological and environmental balance. And what I would say about that is that there are some red lines in cycle design that you literally can't go outside of those red lines without making it non-accessible infrastructure. So it can be really on a very case-by-case basis. We had an example of a design where there was a trunk road and a river, a protected river, I might add, so ecologically protected river, and the space between the trunk road and the river and a huge cliff on the other side was just like this, right? Now, there was enough space to create a path that would allow, for example, a cargo bike to pass, but just that basically. So the way that we thought about designing it was basically provided that there was a clear sight line from the A to B point, what would then be a pinch point. We would be able to design it that way so that if you needed to pass, you could at least wait and see if somebody else was coming. It's not ideal, but sometimes you're completely restricted by the landscape. There was discussion of realigning the trunk road and if that would be a possibility, and that was going to push the cost of the project to beyond what would actually be deliverable. So yeah, we have to consider that all of the time. That does come up quite a lot. I'd say any path that is less than 1.5 meters, that is actually the bare minimum that you should ever have a path, and that is the pinch point. You know, that's a pinch point. So this is really why we designed for the 3 meters wide. Objections based on landscape and character. Generally, if a road is visible from that path, I don't personally have qualms with putting cycle infrastructure in if landscape and character is really the main concern there. Diogo, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is a very specific issue. It's like, for example, in terms of urban infrastructure, you may face problems like in anywhere where you have all those different levels of the city. So yeah, it is very hard sometimes to make the right infrastructure everywhere. So you have to find alternative ways to do the same thing. One of those alternative ways is how Bo said just right now, and there are many others. For example, in Edinburgh, you may need to have lifts on the streets if it is the right solution for to overcome those different levels. But also you have to consider to have to think like is this space the right space to have this? Should we move this to somewhere else where we can just make things work in a proper way? So sometimes you have to think about this. One of the conversations we have right now is about, for example, whether you put cycle paths in a old railway canal. So you for example, and in Sustrans have many paths like this. So they run on the backyards of buildings, etc. So houses and other things. And sometimes people feel these spaces as non-safe spaces. So they're really they feel that they shouldn't use those spaces. And one of the things we are considering is how far should we keep doing these things, or should we just move them and accept that we should just move the cycle path to the streets and make this feel make more safe space and work all this and work on a full street design and not just on a cycle path. Sometimes we have to balance all the things and really think about these things and think that it's really important to provide access and to provide safety for everyone. It's not just about providing the facilities and infrastructure. Is providing really this infrastructure with these characteristics.
Okay, yeah, that was some great answers. I can see that your jobs must be very difficult. You've got a lot of things to consider before you can get things done. I'm just a little bit conscious of time, so I've got a few more questions that I'm going to run through. Hopefully we can get them all done. So the next question is, do you think that there's a risk that the conversations around infrastructure could become quite engineering or tech focused and miss broader questions around equity and justice?
I gave this quite a lot of thought, of course, because it's a pre-submitted question, and it's something I'm like pretty concerned about myself. When I was actually thinking about it, I think actually what's happening is the opposite. I think over time, conversations have become less engineering and tech focused. I think in the transport sector more widely, it has tended to be dominated almost by engineers and planners type thing. But as more and more third sector organizations are getting involved, and as guidance is changing, you know, the Fair Scotland duty coming in, Designing Streets Toolkit coming in, actually what we're seeing now is a greater diversity of talent and backgrounds within the specific sector. So just using Sustrans as an example, I'm going to sound like an advert for Sustrans, just to say. I'm okay with that though. But speaking for my team in particular, you know, there's loads of us, about 60 of us, and folks' backgrounds there. We have engineers, we have urban designers, landscape architects, people who worked in planning and local authorities and things like that. But we also have people whose backgrounds are in community engagement, media, communications, policy, behavior change. My degree is in environmental science. I really didn't know anything about infrastructure until I started at Sustrans. And so I think the way to maintain that is to maintain that diverse pool of talent. And yeah, ensure that it's a collaborative effort as well, because we need engineers, of course, to create these designs and the design guidance, but we need wide consultation with people of diverse experience. And then we need people with diverse academic backgrounds to actually put it into practice. So it's a collaborative thing. I think it's moving away from being too engineering focused. That is merely my perspective, though. I could be wrong. We don't know. Diogo, do you have?
I think you are not wrong. It's something that I also believe in. The same thing is a matter of having a diverse team. So it's not just and if I think we can go in even further from this. It's like I see the same progress across all transportation sector, and transportation sector is becoming more open to listen to people, which was one of the biggest problems in the past, and they didn't care about passengers or the users of the streets, etc. So now the thing is more about not just having diverse teams with diverse backgrounds, especially in terms of degrees, but also having persons that really have this personal experience of these issues, like and having again Sustrans, and we are promoting really well the Sustrans today, so we deserve a rise. I'm kidding. So it's basically is about hiring people that really understand. It's not just about consultation and things like that. Sometimes you really have to have people that feel these things as a life experience. And I talk by myself. I don't have any academic degree. I'm just a person that follow some in terms of work. I follow some paths that lead me to this work, and now I'm working at Sustrans at this level. So it is different to have someone who can understand. It's not just about having disabled persons. You can have people with a wide range of diverse characteristics. Is really having people that by feeling these things, we can understand in a different perspective how to make this work, and we give a lot of different perspectives on how we can just make things work. So I think we have to start moving on from just having diverse teams, because it is important, but we have to have diverse people. It's slightly different.
Yeah, that's excellent to hear that Sustrans, anyway, that was a bit of an ad for Sustrans, that you are doing so well in bringing such a wide variety of people to the organisation, to the charity, and that sounds excellent, because that's what you need. You need people from all different walks of life. You need people from different academic backgrounds, people with different experiences, to make sure that the work that you do is as inclusive, I guess, as it needs to be, since your target audience is everyone. So that's excellent to hear. Okay, I'll move on to the next one. So as I'm sure we've all seen, there's been a big increase in the number of new cyclists on the road since lockdown started. But these new cyclists may be put off now that more cars are back on the roads again. Do you know if there will be an increase in the provision of connected, safe cycled routes for the intrepid novice?
Diogo, should I take it? I'll take it first.
Yeah, take it first.
Cool. The short answer to that is yes. both governments have made commitments within their various policies to active travel. The question is really, how long does it take each individual project to get rolled out? The lifetime of a project on average from being, started at a strategic level to actually being constructed, that's an average of 5 years, but it can be anything from like a year for a nice simple project to, decades where a project is kind of riddled with difficulties type thing. One of the main ways that you can support projects to actually happen faster is to register your support on planning application portals. So I think often within cycle communities and within active travel communities, we're very excited about the infrastructure that we're doing. And it's easy to miss the fact that there's quite a lot of people who don't want road space to be reallocated to active travel, who don't want to lose their parking, and who will be active in making objections to planning applications. So each of those objections is quite powerful in itself. And if you register your support, note that a petition, for example, only acts as one representation on a planning application. So if you register your support for projects, that's one very practical way that you can help projects move a little bit faster. So keep an eye on your local authority planning page. It's the most interesting way you can spend your evening is looking at the planning portal. Diogo?
No, I think you have said everything is the same. Yeah.
Cool.
I think Amy is present right now.
Yeah, Amy's frozen. You may need to be rescued by Tamsin or Emily.
Yeah.
Hi everyone, surprise guest appearance. I'm not ready for this, but I will step in for Amy quickly. Sorry for delay. We do have 2 questions in the chat box, which I do have access to. So I'm just going to quickly ask you those, and then we'll have to wrap the session up. But thank you everyone for joining today. And it's been such a great session. Someone has just asked for a little bit of an expansion on the patterns of tactile paving. Is this random or are they missing something? And if you don't have time to, obviously this might be quite an in-depth topic, are there any resources you can point them towards?
Diogo.
Yeah, I can go with that. So tactile paving is not really random. It can seem so, but it's not. But indeed, in the case of UK, there is a lot of different patterns, and that's why you will find a lot of different ways to do that. But basically, there are two important pieces of tactile paving, and the one is with small blisters, and the other one is with strips. And so these 2 pieces, the one is basically to make people aware of something, is an alert piece, and the other one is basically to guide people. So folks who are blind, they use a white cane, and with the white cane they can just try to touch the ground with that cane. So that's why it is important to have, and both talked about this before, it's important to have this thing of making the pavement talk to us, because everything you place on the ground, they will feel all these tactile paving and the patterns, and they know exactly what they mean, and when is a crossing, and what type of crossing, and what is the direction of the crossing, etc. It is everything expressed by this pavement. And you also have things, some guidance through to tactile paving, which allows people to understand exactly what is the safest way to go around some things. For example, if you have as a cycle parking, blind people will not notice the cycles which are parked there, and it is convenient to have a guide around the area of the parking, so they can just avoid fell on the ground and things like that. So it is to mine use, and you can check a standard for this, which have all the different designs and standards, etc., which is the BS 8300. So you can check. It is about accessibility in general, but has all the different tactile paving designs and standards. So you can check how they work and how to place them. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that. And yeah, it's so interesting, I think, that you've brought up that is like once you start actually looking at the world around you, like how designed it is. But yeah, sorry, we're gonna have to move on quickly. I'm gonna hand back over to Amy and duck out, but thank you for letting me join. I'll see you all again shortly.
Hi there, sorry about that. My internet dropped. I don't know how long I was talking to myself, but that's a bit embarrassing for me. Sorry about that. Okay, final question before we wrap up the session. Vanessa asks, do you have any top tips for consulting adequately during the pandemic? Online isn't always accessible.
This has been the question that we have been tackling all year, and we have had to be pretty innovative. Project that I'm thinking of that has had the most success this year within my own project like portfolio is the Grand Town Society have had a lot of success consulting, and what they did was they did a postcard survey. So they sent out a short series of questions to every address in the town, which is wonderful. And then the postcards were returned to various little post boxes that were dotted around the town. So that not only allows them to actually engage with different businesses and potential stakeholders, but also ensures that literally every household has received a postcard that has these specific questions on it. And the feedback that we ended up getting, we've got a whole database of feedback now, and that's in addition to what they had done online. They also benefit from having a market every month or so. So even though the restrictions wouldn't allow for this just now, but when they had been eased a little bit, the outdoor market was kind of a perfect place that you could do physical distancing and solicit feedback from people at the same time. And of course, more people were heading out to the market to try and get out of their houses. So those were two really good ways, but I think a lot of us have been trying to puzzle over the same thing. Diogo, did you have any good examples over the year?
Yeah, not really much, because it's not a simple thing to do, but is one of the things that I think it can work and is more or less easy to do is if you are working closely with local authorities. They have a lot of data about people who live in the area, so you can try to get information where some target people live. So if you have really specific targets in terms of engagement, and I'm feeling like about blind people that for some reason can't have access to your online systems, or people who are basically excluded from using technology in general, you can find them. So and with all the safety that we can have, like masks and everything else, you can go there and talk directly to those persons. I know this is very difficult to do sometimes because you have to have persons that go to the places and it's not always possible for some reason. And this is really not a simple thing to work around. But I think in some cases it works to do these things. To get information, to go there, talk directly to them, ask things, and analyze how they need to use the space, etc. Because the quality of the work will be amazingly better.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Two really good answers to wrap us up there. I hope that answers your question there, Vanessa. So that's all the questions we have for today. We did run a wee bit over, so apologies for that, but I'm glad that everyone's still with us. Bo and Diogo, you're welcome to turn off your camera and mic now if you'd like. You're welcome to leave if you want. So yeah, that's us reached the end of today's session. And I'd like to say thank you again to Bo and Diogo, to everyone who attended, and to our sponsors, Cycling Scotland, Sustrans and Edinburgh Bike Co-op.